Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new episode of XenTegra on Air podcast series. I'm your host, Indrajit Khorpade, Director of Solution Engineering, XenTegra Private Limited. And with me, Mr. Simon Townsend, Field CTO with IGEL. Hey, hi, Simon. How are you?
Good morning or good afternoon, should I say? Yeah, I'm very well, very well. Pleased to be back. Did you have a good weekend?
Yes, I like it was a friendship day weekend, right? So it was a good weekend, a lot of celebrations around and but I like prefer to be at home and like little bit of rest. How about you? What you did on your weekend?
Yeah, very good. I watched some soccer and saw some of my family. And the sun has finally come out in the UK. So we're on day 2 of sunshine. So very pleased to be experiencing summer at long last, which is good.
That sounds good. Okay, so I think let's continue with the way we promised to our audience. We like this just like decided to cover majority of the topics about IGEL as a solution.
Mhm.
And just a quick recap, in last couple of episodes, we talked about like IGEL, entirely about IGEL as a solution, just brief about IGEL, then overall evolution of IGEL. The last week we talked about IGEL OS 12, Cosmos, what's
Yep.
new in it, and like how it helps to the customers and so on. Last time, even like in a couple of like episodes, even we touched base like how IGEL is a secure solution, what IGEL security is, and I think it's the time to touch base the security of IGEL because this is the key feature or like I'll say USP of IGEL because of which many of the customers are preferring IGEL as a solution. So I think let's cover security like about IGEL. So IGEL, the secure OS. Let's talk about it today.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think last time we spoke, we'd spoken all about IGEL Cosmos, how it was made up of an operating system, a management platform, and then these cloud services. And I think I really wanted to drill down into probably the number one reason why people buy IGEL, and that is because it is a secure operating system. And I think maybe the first place to start is why do we need a secure operating system? Why do we need to secure our employees, regardless of whether people are working in the office or whether they're working at home? Why do we need security in the first place? And funnily enough, I just this morning I was reading some articles on ransomware and malware. And I actually, just for this podcast, I sort of put in, I said, how's India doing, right? And how's that region doing in general? There's been 133% rise in ransomware attacks during 2023, according to Sonic Wall. And I think if you sort of take that number as an indication that sadly ransomware isn't just a topic that was around 2019, 2020, or even if I go back to say, what was it, 2016, and we start to think about the WannaCry outbreak, ransomware is still a problem, and it is still a problem in every organization across the globe. I think there was another report I was reading again just this morning. 73% of Indian-based organizations attacked from a cybersecurity point of view. All of them were ransomware attacks. And then, a huge number of these attacks are also reported to be down to user error. And when I say user error, I mean users or employees unknowingly clicking on links and opening emails and opening up attachments that obviously contain some form of malware or ransomware. So the numbers are quite staggering, and the damage that they do continues to be a problem for every organization. And I think this is, amplified more so now because of hybrid workers. You know, if you think about how we used to secure our employees, we used to secure our data historically, we used to build data centers and people used to come into the office. And so we could build a wall around our building or a virtual wall around our offices that would protect our data centers, and protect our employees whilst they were in work. Today, that's very different. Some of that data has moved up into the cloud, so it's outside the perimeter of our network, and also our employees are outside the perimeter of our network as well, because they've got the ability to work from home or work from multiple different locations. So security has sort of been turned on its head. The need to secure an employee, the need to secure the workspace, secure the data hasn't gone away. But the way in which we try and do that has definitely changed, because so much is now hybrid, and this data and our employees can be sat in so many different places. You know, those numbers I shared, they're not just India alone. You see the same thing happening over here in the UK. You see the same thing happening, particularly in healthcare in the US, local governments, for instance. There are still an incredible amount of cybercrime out there, and the majority and the easiest way for those cyber criminals to get access to people's data is to hold it at ransom, and is typically to use some form of social engineering and deliver something via email and get someone to click on something. So there is a real need to secure the endpoint and secure and protect our employees.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for sharing those numbers. And I think it's actually a risk, and like every customer has to think of it, because like there are a lot of ways to enter in the organization. There are a lot of like people who use different methodologies. So security, data security, network security is like, I think it should be the priority for every organization. Uh, yeah, so I think thanks for sharing those numbers. And it is actually a topic which needs to be addressed from by each and every organization. So just tell me one thing. I know IGEL. I worked on IGEL OS, right? A lot of customers are using IGEL as a solution, or like IGEL is the operating system for security.
Yeah.
So if you can just put some light on that, like so that our audience will even able to understand how IGEL will help in their security journey, or like need for security.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's probably a couple of things we need to cover off here. Number one, how does IGEL secure an employee, and more importantly, how does IGEL secure an endpoint? And then secondly, how does that compare to other solutions that are out there, and perhaps the way that we've been doing it for the last 25 years, right? How we've been securing endpoints. It's an interesting one, because the way in which the approach that IGEL takes, I would argue, is somewhat unique. And the word I would use is prevention. If you think about how lots of organizations have been protecting their endpoints for the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, they have been doing that via detection. And just for a second, let's pause and think about traditional antivirus, or one of these new age EDR type of technologies that's got some sort of clever AI in it. It really is typically based on pattern matching or some sort of form of clever detection to try and detect when something is either about to happen or has happened. If I go back and we look at traditional AV, they would typically look for patterns, right? And they would say, hey, we're an agent, we're running on a Windows endpoint, we've identified and seen a pattern or a virus or something's happened that we recognize from our database. Therefore, we've detected that something has happened. Technologies today are still trying to do that level of detection, but they're trying to do it in a much more proactive way. So they're looking at, is a user doing something that perhaps they're not normally doing? is there an application or a process that's writing to the file system, writing to the registry that typically shouldn't be? Or have I seen some form of activity that is abnormal? Is the person coming from a location that we've not seen before? I would still argue that whether it's the old-fashioned AV or whether it is some of the more up-to-date, new next-gen solutions that are in place, they are still trying to detect when something has happened. And if there's one thing that we all now know better than ever, particularly because of COVID, we know that prevention is better than cure. And if you can stop something from happening straight away, that is the best way. That's the best way of doing it, right? And IGEL, I think, as you know, Indrajit, is it protects the endpoint by preventing things from happening in the first place. And so in answer to your question, how do we do that? Well, first of all, and probably the most important thing to say, is that IGEL OS is read-only. And that means that when we boot up the operating system and a user is interacting and launching a connection to a remote desktop or a virtualized desktop, the file system is being read from, but the user is not able to write to the file system. If you look at how a lot of the ransomware attacks take place, it typically will involve a user clicking on something, which then utilizes a vulnerability and then downloads a payload. And when it downloads that payload, it writes it to disk or writes it to memory, it then executes it, and then all the nasty things happen. Even the encryption of the files, if you think about it, is a process where a process is writing to the disk to encrypt the files. IGEL 101 is a read-only file system. So the operating system boots, we read the files, we read the applications from the disk, but we don't ever write anything back. And that's easier to do with IGEL because typically the Windows environment and the applications are either running on VDI or desktop as a service, or it's a web-based application and everything's happening up in the cloud, but there's nothing by default that's been able to write to disk. That means that even if there was a piece of code that a user tried to introduce via a USB key or a file that was downloaded from the web, that file cannot write to disk. And because it can't write to disk, it typically then can't execute, and therefore nothing nasty can take place. The other thing, the other things to look at there, Indrajit, and we can share with the listeners here sort of like a list of all the key features of IGEL OS and how it's secure. But the other thing to note is that there is a secure boot and a secure chain of trust as a system boots. So much like Windows, we support secure boot. But there are a number of checks that are being done as that system boots to make sure that the integrity of the operating system hasn't changed before we actually then launch the OS and allow the user to log on. If you take a look in at the file system and all of the partitions that we're using, you can actually see this very well in something like ControlUp, as an example. In the ControlUp UI, if you're managing and can see a device via ControlUp, you can actually see that every single part of the disk and every partition is encrypted as well. So number one, we've gone through a secure boot. Number two, all of our partitions and our drives are encrypted. If you look at the processes and how the processes are running, they're typically isolated processes. So the processes can't actually talk to each other. So, the process that's running the secure Workspace app can't talk to the core OS. And then you've got this read-only file system, which is then stopping people from writing to disk. The other thing, just at a very simple level to discuss, is just the attack surface area of IGEL compared to a Windows device. And this number perhaps might shock some of your listeners, but the latest version of Windows is 30, 35, 40 gig in size, which means there's a lot of files held on that disk to run that operating system. That's a lot of processes, applications, and files that need to be patched and updated and therefore could have vulnerabilities, etc. IGEL, on the other hand, is less than 2 gig in size. So it's 90% smaller than its Windows equivalent, which, you know, the fact that it's read-only and it's secure boot is one thing, but the fact that there are just less files, less processes running, the overall attack surface area is significantly smaller. That makes for an incredibly secure operating system. So secure boot and then secure when it's up and running.
Yeah. You mentioned about, I was actually about to ask that question, and like you touched based on it, right? Chain of trust. So if you can
Yeah.
just talk more about chain of trust, like because like whenever I attend that webinars or like any discussion with IGEL, right? From every IGEL SC, right? I heard that word chain of trust. If you can just put some more light on that, right? So you already covered that, but I want you to talk a little more on what a chain of trust and like how it is different from other solutions which are there in the market, or what exactly it is. If you can just tell us more about it.
Yeah. I mean, in short, it is a controlled boot sequence. Okay, so what we're really talking about here is making sure that the operating system, IGEL OS, is actually intact and has not been tampered with on the last time that it was powered on. So it is a controlled boot sequence from the moment that you power the device on, all the way through to when the user logs on and has got their desktop up and running, to make sure that no component has been tampered with. And the way that we do that is by checking the cryptographic signature of IGEL OS. So either you may be running IGEL on an old IGEL thin client. Obviously, we don't manufacture and make those devices anymore, but there's 12,000 odd customers out there who have still got IGEL devices. Well, that's a trusted device. Or you've got UEFI, right? You've got the and the way that the BIOS actually boots. So by incorporating that secure boot, you're basically saying from the moment that you power something on, we're actually going to check the signature of the operating system, make sure that it has not been altered before we then load that operating system into memory and boot it up. Very, very simple. What that means is that when a user logs onto that environment first thing in the morning, there has been a check that has been made to say, this is still IGEL OS. There are no new unknown processes secretly running in the background. The image that we booted is the image that was deployed down, whether it was last week or during the manufacturing and the installation process. So it just gives you that complete assurance that what you are running today is exactly IGEL OS. Once it's booted, obviously what you've then got is all those other aspects then kick in. The fact that it's read-only, the fact that the drives are encrypted, the fact that the processes are running in isolation, the fact that there's no data on the device and that it's being managed in a secure way, that then makes sure that it's secure for while that user is logged on and running, etc.
Yep. Thanks, Simon. I think we covered majority of the aspects about IGEL security. Just one last question. Even you mentioned prevention is better than cure, right?
Yeah.
So I think the existing customers, like maybe using Windows or any other operating systems, traditionally, or like it is seen here, people are like using some endpoint protection, EDR, XDR solution to secure their endpoints. So if you can just before we conclude, if you can just differentiate between securing the endpoints with an antivirus or like EDR, XDR solution and using IGEL operating system as an edge or like endpoint operating system to secure the environment.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of organizations, quite rightly, they spend a lot of money and a lot of time deploying solutions to overcome challenges that Windows inherently has on the endpoint. And let's not try and talk too much about whether Windows is secure, because Windows is secure, right? You know, Windows as an endpoint operating system has served us very well. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, Office 365 and other services like Defender, for instance, that are coming in now, they're doing a very good job at detecting and remediating things as they take place. But if you think about a standard Windows build in any organization, it may well have a VPN client on it to allow a user to securely access corporate information. It might well have some form of antivirus or EDR solution on it to detect. It may have a different product on it, like a controller, like 1,000 Eyes, like an Eternity, to do monitoring. It may have a completely separate tool on it to deal with recovery, right? Something that is backing the files up or taking an image of that device so that that device can be recovered significantly quicker. All of these features, though, are really focused on monitoring, detecting, responding, and recovering. And before you know it, you boot up a Windows machine and it's got 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 different agents on it just to manage and secure that environment, let alone the patch management that runs every other Tuesday, and the patches that need to be deployed and the process that needs to go around that, right? It's like, oh, you know, there's 102 vulnerabilities this month that have been released from Microsoft. I've got to scan all of my devices. I've got to work out which ones have been updated, which ones haven't. I've got to test those patches, make sure that those patches are not going to break any of my applications. And then I've got to deploy those out. So patch management alone can take 1, 2, 5, 10 people in an organization and a whole set of different tools just to keep vulnerabilities patched and updated without even looking at VPN technology, antivirus technology, monitoring and recovery. So what you end up with is a very expensive and complex stack of technologies installed on a Windows endpoint. They're paying for IT, but a necessity. But they also can have a detrimental effect on the employee. Like every other Tuesday, I've got to wait for my Windows blue screen to update all my patches. I've got to make sure that I don't have any, you know, I might have so many processes running on my system that I'm already using 2 GB of RAM and a load of CPU power on my laptop every day just to run these security and these monitoring tools. And then you've got the cost of those solutions. So you're paying a subscription for Intune add-ons, so you can do remote management. You're paying for your VPN licenses. You're paying for your EDR solution. You're paying for your antivirus technology. You may have additional firewalls or security tools on there as well. Before you know it, the cost of deploying a Windows desktop is also incredibly high. So cost, time, and performance all come as a cost to securing a device. If you compare that to what we do with IGEL, the Windows desktop typically is running centrally in a data center somewhere because it's being deployed by VDI. It's centrally managed. It uses image management. I can secure one image and yet thousands of people can access it. And on the endpoint, all of a sudden, I can negate the need. I can remove my CrowdStrike. I can remove my VPN technology. I can remove my 1,000 Eyes. I can remove my patch management software from the endpoint. I now can just very, very simply manage tens of thousands, if needed, of endpoints very, very simply by deploying this Linux-based read-only operating system. And it sounds, you know, initially quite scary and very, very different. It's like, what? you're asking me to deploy a different operating system than Windows on an endpoint. That sounds complicated. That sounds different. Well, it is different. You know, we've been deploying Windows desktops for 25 years, and every time Microsoft comes out with a new operating system, we go and update it to the latest operating system. We typically go and buy new hardware. We have to retest all of our applications, and we have to go and buy new security technologies to secure that environment. I mean, we've got to the point where we have to think differently. We can't continue to spend the same amount of money, the same amount of time that we've been spending for the last 25 years just to deal with vulnerabilities and security. We have to think differently. Our mobile phones already operate in this way. Google Chrome OS, to be perfectly fair, is already thinking in this different way. IGEL OS happens to be another solution that is thinking differently, but, you know, in my opinion, balances what is required by many organizations, which is a secure operating system, but without without compromising on performance, without compromising and removing the ability to access Windows applications and join Teams calls and Zoom calls, etc. So it's not often that you find a solution that is secure that doesn't cost you the earth. And we've spoken about IGEL being how IGEL can be installed on existing devices and saves you money because you don't need to buy net new hardware. We've got something quite unique here in that, you know, this is a solution which is more secure, but actually saves money at the same time. And I can't think off the top of my head many solutions out there that can do that. Obviously, I'm very biased. I work for IGEL. I've been selling this solution for 5+ years, and I see it being deployed. But that's the truth, right? How do we actually look at saving money, saving the planet, doing more with less, but actually improving security? That's where IGEL comes in, and it's that preventative approach that means that I don't need this complex stack on my Windows desktop, and that my IT employees can spend time doing other things, and that I'm not impacting user experience.
Yeah, I think it would be of like interest for majority of our listeners, because as you said, like if customers will move or start their journey with IGEL, then there'll not be any need of additional endpoint security, EDR, XDR solution, and so on. So I think it will actually a point of interest of majority of the customers. So I think, right, till now people were talking about endpoint protection, edge protection, and like a lot of security parameters. So do you think this is kind of a era of securing the operating system? And like I think people should, like the security administrators or like security teams, network security teams even should think on like using a secured operating system. And I think it's a new evolution or like new thing which majority of the organizations not yet tried, but I think they should go for it.
Yeah, I think as I'm speaking to a lot of organizations at the moment, they are really talking about zero trust. How can they move to a zero trust architecture? Zero trust architectures really focus on a couple of different pillars. You know, how do I secure the data? How do I secure the applications? How do I secure the devices, the employees, etc.? If you look at what we're doing, we can actually be part of that story, and we can actually do that very well. By securing the endpoint with a secure read-only operating system, you're actually by default starting to secure the device. By working with organizations like XenTegra, who can deploy VDI, desktop as a service, you're moving your workloads into the cloud, you're hosting them centrally, so you're starting to secure the workloads, secure the data. So IGEL and VDI, IGEL and desktop as a service, IGEL and SaaS-based applications, they play quite an important part in anyone looking at a zero trust architecture. The other thing, obviously, I think that's worth noting is that lots of organizations today are now looking at things like contextual and conditional access. How do we secure an environment, not just based on who the user is, but where they are, what device they're using, how they're accessing it, where they are in the world, what applications they're running, what day of the week it is. IGEL has got the ability to link into things like AD, conditional access, or ENTRA, as it's now called. So conditional access. We can do contextual access with partners like Device Trust. A user can log on to an IGEL device and use authentication methods such as ENTRA, such as ping, such as Okta, for instance. We do some fairly clever stuff with the NetScaler appliances as well. So Citrix Secure Access, for instance, we're compatible with that. We can shadow a device remotely. We can do secure shadowing over secure channels. And every device that we manage is centrally managed as well via secure protocols. So via a single secure WebSocket-based, certificate-based infrastructure. So every single device that we're managing needs a certificate on it before it can talk back to the management console. The IT administrator knows full well it can communicate with that device in a secure way over secure channel as well. So all in all, doesn't matter whether we're talking about the operating system, the management of it, the authentication, how we tie into some of the other solutions out there, we do provide quite a secure model, as I said, that I really think helps people move towards what a lot of people are trying to do at the moment, which is zero trust architecture.
Thanks, Simon. I think we talked, or like we covered a lot of things about IGEL security, how like IGEL OS is a read-only operating system, chain of trust, zero trust, and a lot of things you already covered, like how this particular OS is secure and like how it will help customers, especially using VDI, SaaS-based applications, and so on. So I think we covered it well, the security aspects of IGEL. And I think with this, let's like call it as the end of this episode, and let's continue like educating people with this webinar series. Like let's connect next week, and let's talk about some other feature or some other topic about IGEL. Let's not disclose it right now. Let's announce it in the coming episode. Thanks, Simon.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for your time. And I'll catch you in next week. And let's record a new episode.
Yeah, thank you. Speak soon.
Thank you.